All right, the things on the show are going to look a little bit different during the Canada Votes period. The Power Panel is standing by. They're all here in the studio to talk about day 2 of the campaign, but we begin with a roundup of where the party leaders were today and what they pitched to voters. Conservative Leader Pierre Polievre is in the Greater Toronto area. He announced a tax cut while in Brampton before heading to Mississauga this evening for a photo op.
These people behind me, they work hard every day. And yet, at the end of the month, they look at their pay stub and it's tax after tax after tax after tax. And the more they work, the more they pay. And we're punishing our workers.
Polievre is promising a cut for the lowest tax bracket, bringing it down from 15% to 12.7%. He says it will save the average worker $900 a year. The CBC's Kate McKenna is following the Conservative Leader's campaign.
David, Pierre Polievre has been signaling for months that he plans to cut income tax, and now we've seen his plan. If he is elected Prime Minister, it'll come into full effect in 2027, and it's a larger tax cut than what Mark Carney put in the window yesterday. It's set to cost $14 billion annually, and he was asked what he would cut to be able to afford this tax cut, and he, of course, has been very critical of Liberals in the past for their management of the public purse. He said he would cut bureaucracy, he'd cut consultants, he'd cut foreign aid. This is something that he has frequently gone back to whenever he's asked what he would cut to fund particular things that he plans to do. He went back to that again today. And he also said that he is planning to release a costed platform.
We will be cutting bureaucracy, cutting consultants, cutting back on handouts to insiders, and we will cut back on foreign aid to bring our money home to this country. We will also, and those will be spelled out in our platform with numbers.
This is a major announcement for Polievre, and it's not a surprise that he's doing it in the Toronto region. He's spending the first 3 days of the campaign here. Conservatives believe that they can make inroads. There are more than 50 seats up for grabs in the GTA. Most of them at this time belong to Liberals, but polling suggests so far that this region is a close race between the Liberals and the Conservatives, so we can expect Polievre to be back here often. David?
All right, Kate, that's the CBC's Kate McKenna in Mississauga. Well, the Liberals have also announced an income tax cut proposal. Their cut will be smaller and is aimed at making up for the loss of the carbon rebate. But today, Liberal leader Mark Carney was in Gander, Newfoundland and Labrador, to pitch himself as the candidate best positioned to deal with President Donald Trump.
President Trump wants to break us so America can own us. And we will not let that happen. President Trump's plan is to divide and conquer. Pierre Polievre's plan is to divide and be conquered.
Mark Carney made that appeal in a town that has played a symbolic role in the Canada-U.S. relationship. The CBC's Ashley Burke is traveling alongside the Liberal leader. Ashley.
David, I'm with the Liberal campaign on the tarmac in Gander, Newfoundland. This airport is where Mark Carney is tapping into the town's history to try and persuade Canadians he's the best choice to help Canada in a time of crisis. This town famously took in thousands of international travelers on 9/11. Their planes were diverted following the terrorist attacks on the U.S. Carney met with 2 local women who helped stranded passengers, including Americans, and said that Trump's actions have put the 2 countries' relationship under greater strain than any time in our storied history. Then he pitched that just like Gander helped others, his government is looking to help Canadians through this trade war. Carney was asked by media today what efforts he's made to try and speak with Donald Trump. Carney said that he believes the U.S. president is waiting until the election is over to talk, and said he's available for a call, but on Canada's terms as a sovereign country. Carney's next stop is in Halifax as he continues to tour Atlantic Canada, where he's leading in the polls. David?
Thank you, Ashley. That is the CBC's Ashley Burke in Gander, Newfoundland and Labrador. Okay, let's break down the first couple of days and those tax policy pitches that the frontrunner parties have put out there. We've got the Power Panel standing by here in the studio. Vanda Nakadar was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Everybody here in person around the table. It's so much fun. Good to see you all. Vandana, let's start with your impression of Mark Carney, his opening pitch and leading with a tax cut. What do you make of that tactical decision by the Liberal leader?
Yeah, I think he also knows that as much as tariffs is on the minds of Canadians, that affordability still is on the front, like on minds of Canadians. And I think he knows that's a key thing. I think as people go on to the campaign, they're going to look for what else do you have to offer, and a tax cut's always sexy. I mean, it helped in 2015 when we offered a middle-class tax cut. It's going to help now, but also showcase that people are looking at him like, are you going to be some sort of fiscal hawk? But he's showing that he is understanding that this is what Canadians are thinking about the most and delivering for that.
So, Lisa, we got a 1% cut, or 1 percentage point cut in the lowest tax rate for the Liberals, 2.25 points from Pierre Polievre.
Do I hear 3 from the NDP?
I don't think they're going to go there. I think we've got a graphic just to show here, if we can, sort of just how it breaks down, but in terms of also what it's going to cost the Treasury, because the costing that we've been able to get, oh, good, I didn't lie. It's the Liberals, they've both proposed a cut to Canada's lowest tax bracket, and the Liberals would decrease the current 15% tax rate by 1 percentage point. The Conservatives say they'd phase in a cut of 2.25 percentage points. And the Liberals say, using the PBO calculator, theirs will cost $6 billion annually. The Conservatives say when it's fully brought in by 2027, we're talking $14 billion a year. There's already a $50 billion deficit and a tariff war. I mean, what do you make of these moves? These are big price tag items going on with a pretty big deficit already.
Bannon has said it. I mean, they're cluing into the fact that what Canadians are really worried about is how much money they have in their pocket, how much money they're taking home. Is life affordable? Can I afford my rent? Can I afford what's happening in terms of inflation? And also the concern about tariffs at the end of the day. So it makes sense that they're leading with this. And like I say it facetiously, but if we're in a situation where one party says we're going to do X, the other person says we'll do X plus 2, the third one says we'll do X plus 3, Canadians are going to have a little bit of a hard time figuring out which way to go. Or maybe they'll just sit back and wait for the best offer that comes their way.
Brad, how do you see this? I mean, the NDP we'll talk about them a little bit later in their policy offer, but they're not in the tax cut game right now.
Yeah, I think we should stay tuned on what the party has. I think it's a coincidence. Good for the show to start off with two parties with the same kind of policy areas. The question is, I mean, no Canadian's going to sit back tonight and say, oh, no, I don't pay enough taxes, please tax me more. Nobody's going to say that. The real question I think we need to make is when we talk about changes to the tax code, are what we're doing fair? Is this the most efficient way of getting money into the pockets of those folks? And I know, there's lots of debate as to how you can provide tax relief, whether you bring down the brackets, whether you increase the personal allowance at the front end, which is progressively, as you make more, your allowance goes down a little bit. So I think we're going to have a good discussion. And I think that the New Democrats will have more to say on tax fairness going forward. But certainly, I agree.
Tax fairness doesn't sound like a tax cut, though. Well, is that more of like going after tax avoidance and that sort of stuff?
It could mean tax cuts for some Canadians who need the relief the most. But I do agree with the point that is made, that while tariffs are dominating, I think, the conversation, there is still room for how Canadians see how they're going to get through this tariff thing. And of course, affordability is absolutely front and center, as well as housing, which we're going to get to.
Right. So, Rob, your thoughts on this? I mean, these are expensive items. Cutting taxes are expensive items, and there's already a pretty big deficit, and nobody is saying they want to keep running deficits for a super long period of time with Mr. Carney in charge and Mr. Polievre in charge. That means some things have got to change on the spending side.
Yeah, but when I was very popular at Christmas around family gatherings, because I would take a magic quarter, put it into a mayonnaise jar, I would tell the kids, place it under Funk and Wagnall's porch. It was there since noon this morning, and voila, I've transported it to some other dimension. And this sounds a lot like that. I say people need to beware of politicians who don the magic cape, wave the magic wand, and say they are going to cut spending, eliminate the deficit, and cut taxes. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. No matter how they outline their cuts, a lot of things have to go right in the economy. I think what we saw, very interesting to see the Liberals try to get out ahead on the tax cutting front. That's usually Conservative territory. Conservatives usually do very, very well when they establish themselves as a tax cutting party. We're seeing Mark Carney in the middle of a campaign kind of building the Liberal Party and rebuilding the Liberal Party by refashioning it, and the tax cut right off the bat was an attempt to do that. It's also an attempt to squash the change issue. and make it so that it's not really an issue. You're going to get the same thing. The thing that everybody cares about is who is going to deal with Donald Trump, who's going to get us across the stormy waters. On the way here, I listened to a report about Conference Board of Canada survey that's showing consumer confidence at its lowest levels ever.
Yeah,
right?
Agreed.
And
people are rattled. There's no question.
And
right?
what are they
How could
rattled
not be?
about? They're rattled about losing their jobs. Not about their taxes, but about losing their jobs. And whoever can say to Canadians, I'm going to help you hang on to your job or help you transform into another job if you lose your job, that's the person that's going to get the vote.
So, Vandana, that's clearly the central proposition of Mark Carney, right, as Liberal leader and as Prime Minister. But he's also very successfully prosecuting the record of the government he now leads, right, and sort of like throwing policies overboard and moving away from things and going in a very centrist, industrial-focused direction that was not there 2 months ago.
One would say conservative direction.
I would say
Yes, one
pragmatic
would.
direction. I would say like,
Everybody's got a word for
like-
it. Yeah, it's funny.
This is Mark Carney's party now. It is not Justin Trudeau. So he will have his own view, his own direction, something that he has been thinking about for a long time. And I think what he's looking at is not just, to Rob's point, not just what is the magical wand. How do you create the conditions to inoculate Canadians from the worst of tariffs, to protect their jobs, and to just build the Canadian economy so that it is resilient? And I think he's going to look at this as one thing he's looking at. But I think what he's looking at from a broader perspective is how do we create the conditions for the country for success in the future as well? So it. Oh, go ahead.
To protect them from what's coming and then to rebuild on the other side. It's sort of how he's pitching it.
Exactly.
Right?
And he's a pragmatic leader. So I think he knows that there are things that don't work. They weren't his things. Yes, as a liberal brand, liberals and any party will defend their party's interests, whether they agree or not behind closed doors. But he will have a own direction. The country's also changed over the last 10 years. And it requires different things. And people are looking at, when I think of resiliency and unity in building, I think of young people, I think of people my age, I think of people older, and how do you make the economy work for everyone when everyone has different needs?
So Lisa, you say this, you might call these conservative ideas. He's just like Justin, but he's copying all of Pierre's plans. Those don't go together, right?
Yes, they do. Well, they
How do
totally do. They totally do, because you can't deny the fact that he has been part of the brain trust that has been advising the Prime Minister at least for the last 4 years. I know of I can't go back 10 years. Absolutely, the last 4 years. That's when they
probably
first made the
like
announcement.
coming out of COVID. It was
It's
around
when they made the
2021. Him and
announcement.
Michael Sabia.
They made the announcement, right? So that's clearly on the record. So he's been doing the advice in the last 4 years, which is a long period of time. So you have to wear a little bit of where we are now, or the missed opportunities that we've had in the past 4 years that have suddenly just changed, as a result of the realization of where we are standing in this moment vis-a-vis an economy that is soft, that needs to be strong in order to put up with what's going to happen vis-a-vis the United States. So I think you can say both without a question. And I think the just like Justin part comes in, which is he may be saying the pragmatic things right now, but can you really trust him and the folks around him who look a lot like the same to make the tough decisions that are going to come in terms of pipelines, in terms of oil and gas, in terms of regulatory approvals that are going to be needed?
His announcement on Friday, coming out of the First Minister's meeting, was a big shift in the direction that I think you would like on pipelines and project approvals, the one timeline and all of these things.
Yeah.
I still don't get the sense he would force it through Quebec. I'm not sure any leader would force it through Quebec, but he's moved on an industrial policy that I don't think the previous leader would have been able to do, or at least he's put it in the window.
So, you know what? The previous government has made some decisions, but they are also holding back on other parts of it. So it's going to come down to very real projects. What are you going to do on LNG? What are you going to do with respect to pipelines east to west? Because the reality that we're dealing with is different now. If Donald Trump decides to turn off one of the pipelines coming into eastern Canada, that's it for them. There's no oil going into, there's no aviation fuel at Pearson Airport if the Americans decide to turn it off at the border. And these are really big issues, so maybe there's a bit more impetus to make these kinds of decisions. But the question is are you going to trust the people who have been saying this all along, i.e. the Conservatives, or are you going to trust the people who just in the last moment have found Jesus and have realized that we have to move in a different direction?
Brad, I can tell by the smile on your face you don't trust this conversion on the road to the election necessarily is happening. But what do you make of this? That it is a move towards more center ground, more of a Chrétien Martin era view of liberalism that is happening at electoral speed.
There's no question. And so I'm going to take a different tack than Lisa. In terms of Carney, I think making a distinct differentiator in terms of his policy directions from the Trudeau. Now, this is, and he's moving the party to the center or to the center right. And it does bring back the memories, and those are tough years, those 90s, the 1990s. And, this is why, the NDP are talking about housing.
I think we met at a tuition protest in the 1990s, Brad. That's
perhaps
how old we are.
That's true.
That's when I met him, actually.
Perhaps that's true, too. I don't know where Russo was.
Reporting on it.
He was reporting on it. No, there's no question that Mr. Carney's moving the party to the right. There's no question. Now, does this provide opportunity for the NDP to, and now that the campaign is going on and the party has, it's going to be spending the legal maximum centrally. It has going to be spending the legal maximum in dozens and dozens of target ridings. And it's got issues like housing, like what Singh was out on today. Jagmeet Singh was out on today. The 90s are a time that we can point to in the NDP to talk about when Paul Martin got the federal government out of building housing. We are still digging ourselves out of the hole that Paul Martin created. And the question I think we're going to have for Mr. Carney, and progressives that voted for Trudeau in 15, 19, and 21, who are, I think, open to moving back to the NDP, even though there's some softening in the polls in the opening weeks. I think there's lots of time in this campaign to say, the party that Trudeau ran and the policies that you liked about Trudeau are gone. We're going back to the 90s, and the New Democrats will be fighting in the House of Commons for you. And I think that taps into what Singh's message was in the opening.
Right. We'll see. Rob, your thoughts there?
I just want to clarify that we're talking about the 1990s, not the 1890s.
Yeah, exactly.
Number one. Number two, I remember the 90s. I was here. They were pretty good times. The country turned it around after great sacrifice and began running, I think, about a dozen.
Provincial capitals might disagree.
Right.
They
began. The country began running a dozen surpluses in a row. The Canadian dollar started coming back in a big way. So that's a dangerous thing to try to point to. I'm not sure that we're addressing the issue that people really care about. Once change is out of the way, and the Liberals are trying to put. I heard Mark Carney say the word change 5 or 6 times in his opening remarks. You got to turn to the elephant that's in the room, and the elephant that's in the room it isn't housing right now. It's, can I hang on to the house that I got? Can I hang on to the job that I got? And can I deal? Who's going to deal with that guy who's in Washington who is going to take away my job? My job is already on the knife's edge as a result of what's going on there. And who's going to have that plan?
I flick on my pen here. I think you're right when it comes to older voters. Younger voters still care about getting into the housing market and those things, right? So that is, you've got to deal with. There's a generational component to this,
can hang
right?
on to the youth vote and the unionized vote, particularly in southwestern Ontario and in northern Ontario, they are going to do very, very well in this election.
Okay, it's only day 2 of this election campaign, but the Liberals and Conservatives have already given us 2 competing proposals for income tax cuts. The tax rate for the lowest tax bracket is set at 15% right now. The Liberals say they bring it down 1 percentage point to 14%. For the Conservatives, they're promising to phase in over a 2-point cut, reaching 12.75%. The Liberals say this would cost the government coffers about $6 billion. The Conservatives say their plan at full implementation by 2027, well, it will cost $14 billion a year. Reporters are already pressing both leaders on how they'd afford these cuts and other big spending promises.
We're going to get that level of spending increase down. That in and of itself will create room. And we will use scarce taxpayers' dollars to catalyze huge private investment.
We will be cutting bureaucracy, cutting consultants, cutting back on handouts to insiders, and we will cut back on foreign aid to bring our money home to this country.
Okay, joining me now to talk about these promises and the overall financial picture whoever wins will be dealing with is economist Rebekah Young. She's Vice President and Head of Inclusion and Resilience Economics at Scotiabank. Rebekah Young, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
The Liberals say their plan could save individuals about $400 a year. The Conservatives say about $900 a year when it's fully implemented. But that's a lot of revenue to the Treasury. I mean, what would those revenue losses mean for the federal budget?
You're right. They are very big chunks. And so typically when, vying leaders make these commitments, they talk about a 4-year mandate. So we look at what sort of revenue hole is that going to leave, or expenditure hole. So we're talking now, anywhere between 24 to 64 billion between the two candidates now. So those are big holes that they're going to have to fill. Now it is day 2. We know that in campaigns that we're going to see pretty much every day, we're going to see new measures. It's going to be tough, staying on top of it, but it really is, at the end of the day, we need to see that full package. What else is on the spending side and on the saving side, and how much does it all add up to at the end of the day?
Well, my experience is parties tend not to highlight the saving side of things too much during an election campaign. But, just on the spending side, like $6 billion from the Liberals, $14 billion from the Conservatives on tax cuts. They both say they'd kill the capital gains inclusion changes, which is about $19 billion in revenue over 4 years. So that's gone. They all want to meet the 2% NATO defense spending target, or get close to it over the next couple of years, which is tens of billions of dollars. GST cuts on home purchases. I mean, you're already starting at a $50 billion deficit in round numbers. I mean, what kind of a fiscal challenge is doing all of this?
You're right. These are big numbers. Now, to compound that is that we're also likely in a worse starting position. Even when we look forward 5 weeks from now, there are a lot of uncertainties outside of our own borders that could lead to a further deterioration in our fiscal balance or our ability to spend. So I think it does, we have to see where these, what they're going to offset it with. And it won't be easy. I think that we do hear both parties saying that they're going to rein in, public spending. They're going to, focus on public servants, where the numbers have grown quite substantially. But really, when you look at where do federal expenditures go, that share is really only about 12% of what they spend. A good chunk of it, over 40%, is transfers to provinces, transfers to households, things like OAS. And those really aren't, haven't been on the table and aren't likely to be on the table. So it's no doubt, it's not only, the pool of where they can find savings is small, but also, there's a lot of implementation risk. And we see this with measures that get announced and, and don't necessarily, the revenues don't necessarily transpire as they anticipate, or in the case of, what we saw with the tax reversal, is they don't necessarily always see the day of light. So big risks when you put, spending on the table without necessarily the offsets.
Yeah, I certainly, Mark Carney has said he's not touching transfers to provinces, he's not touching transfers to individuals. He wants to slow the rate of growth of government and sort of cap the size of the civil service, boost productivity, use AI to do that, but it's not quite clear exactly how that will play out. And Mr. Polievre's talking about, cutting the CBC, cutting foreign aid, cutting waste, as he says it, but I mean, we'll see if you can get to the tens of billions with those things, right? Because overshadowing all of this, Rebekah Young, is April 2nd and Donald Trump, right? And who knows exactly what he's going to hit us with, but it's going to be something. So, I mean, how does, if we move into like a real hot trade war, how does that change all of the assumptions that everybody's campaigning under?
Pretty much the landscape gets rewritten, and including the fiscal landscape. And so, if we just look at the threats that are on the table, those 25% tariffs and the 10% on energy, that type of scenario brings us into recession territory. And that's where you see things, revenues decline, people lose their jobs. We see also then expenditures, things like EI costs going up. So you can easily kind of pencil in another $50 billion over the mandate that they'll spend automatically because of these kind of levers that, shift in response to the downturn. But then we know also that any government is going to have to step in and provide stimulus or a rescue package. And so if we think of this type of scenario and I would say it's not even the worst case scenario, if we think of the 25% tariff war, Canada will hurt. But it is, it can get worse. And so that also kind of warrants a bit of caution in that, that we may find ourselves in a different economic situation a couple of quarters from now, where we're going to be thinking about what sorts of supports does the economy need right now. And, you look back at the global financial crises, we look forward at a trade war scenario, we could see governments, needing to put somewhere in the order of 2% of GDP on the table very quickly. And that, roughly is $60+ billion. So those are big numbers before we even talk about the campaign pledges.
Right.
One thing I would, yeah.
No, go ahead. I thought you were done there.
I was just going to say, it is early days, and so we want to see the full gambit. And one thing I would say, is that first of all, we see in campaign, platforms, we, almost always see tax cuts, personal income tax cuts. That resonates with voters. Typically, Canadians see that. They can, they see the numbers of what it'll mean at the end of the day. And I think in this particular context, I think, politicians are likely reading the room right in the sense that we've come out of, incredibly, high inflation, which has come back to target, but prices are still high. And now forward looking, Canadians are worried about job insecurity because of all those trade threats. So I think, they're reading the room in that sentiment, but we really need to see stuff on the side of what, how are they going to grow the economy, whether or not we're in a trade war. We also need to see more measures on that side of the ledger.
Yeah, certainly based on everything Mr. Polievre has said till now, what Mark Carney said on Friday, there's going to be a renewed focus on industrial policy. I think that is safe to say, whoever wins this, whether it works, who knows. But 2% of GDP, as you talked about, as a response to a tariff war, $60 billion. That's doubling of the deficit, essentially, in round numbers, though some of that will be offset, I suppose, with counter-tariff revenue. But it just speaks to the volatility of it all, right? And the dampening economic effect. So I just wonder that should voters take any promise at face value right now until we know exactly what Donald Trump is going to do and what the impact is, because the most well-intended tax cut, I guess, could be off the table if Trump hits hard and deep and doesn't back down. I mean, how should people view these big promises given all of the uncertainty?
Well, I think we're in a rapidly changing environment, and so I think that in Canada we will have more information. April 2nd is an important date to see how much of these threats materialize, and so that will be kind of inform the way forward. And it'll be a long stretch between now and April 28th in terms of what happens, and also what promises are made. And we also know we haven't seen details yet, so some of these measures we don't know when they would be introduced, in what year, and so assuming it's a 4-year mandate, that can be, spread out over that period of time. So I think that, we have to take at face value what pledges are made. This is, the way that campaigns unfold. You have to look at that bigger package as well at the end of the day, what's on the table. And I do think that, we have, great information that comes from the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who, works basically night and day for 5 weeks to put numbers to some of these promises, and allows us, as Canadians and as economists to tally them up and see, what'll it do for the economy? How much will it cost? Are they the right type of measures in terms of, enhancing growth, or, perhaps other, unintended consequences?
Yeah, it's the shortest election campaign allowed under law, but with Donald Trump in a trade war, it could be the longest campaign, or at least feel that way. Rebekah Young, we always appreciate the time and the insights. Rebekah Young, Vice President of Scotiabank. Good to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you.